today.
Hello, I'm Robin Dwyer. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories. Tens of thousands of Palestinians forced to flee central Gaza as Israeli forces advance. The United Nations says 85% of the enclave's population is now displaced. Russia launches a huge coordinated air assault on cities across Ukraine, killing 18 people and destroying infrastructure. Another blow for Donald Trump. Maine becomes the second US state to block him from running for president there over claims of insurrection. And after a decade of trying, Romania and Bulgaria will join Europe's free travel zone, but only for people travelling by sea or air. The United Nations says an estimated 150,000 Palestinians are being forced to flee central Gaza as Israeli forces advance. The IDF is also expanding its ground offensive in the southern city of Khan Yunis. Palestinian authorities say at least 187 people have been killed in Israeli strikes in the past 24 hours, while the death toll in Gaza since October the 7th has now reached over 21,500 people. Well, let's head first to Israel and talk to our correspondent in Tel Aviv, Trent Murray. So, Trent, there have been some more strikes across Israel's border with Lebanon. What's been happening there?
Yeah, that's right, Robin. We've had rocket sirens sounding over the past few hours once again in northern Israel, with Hezbollah claiming responsibility for launching rockets from southern Lebanon. It comes as reports also emerged from Lebanon of what the Lebanon National News Agency is saying was a drone strike by Israelis on a car. They are saying it was an attempted assassination. We're still trying to gather further details of who was in that car. But we are also hearing reports that Israeli Air Force jets have been flying at low altitude over southern Lebanon as tensions in that region continue to simmer. Of course, this comes just days after quite strong rhetoric out of Tel Aviv from politicians, including War Cabinet Minister Benny Gantz, who has warned Hezbollah is putting the entire southern region of Lebanon into turning it into a combat zone, I should say. He went on to say that they are putting the entire state of Lebanon at risk and has called on the Lebanese government to try and rein Hezbollah in. He said if they don't do that, then he will instruct the IDF to do it for them.
And Trent, the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees in Gaza has accused Israel of firing on an aid convoy. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, this is a very serious allegation. That UN agency is saying that an aid convoy that was travelling back from northern Gaza came under fire by Israeli troops on the ground. They say that there were no injuries sustained by those aid workers in the car, but the vehicle itself did sustain damage. Now, we haven't had an official response yet from the Israeli government to those accusations by the UN, but the IDF has said it's looking into the incident. We're also tracking continued violence continuing to flare in the West Bank. We heard overnight that Israel launched targeted raids on 10 cities across the West Bank, including notably the power centre of Ramallah. We know that that region, of course, while a lot of the focus is understandably on Gaza, the situation in the West Bank remains very tense. We are being told by Palestinian authorities that more than 300 people have died at the hands of Israeli forces since October 7th. More than 5,000, or almost 5,000, I should say, have been arrested. And once again, we're seeing on this Friday more unrest at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. We know many of the faithful there tried to attend Friday prayers. They're effectively barred from doing so right now. And so there was more unrest as the Israelis tried to hold back those who were trying to attend the mosque.
Trent, thank you very much. Our correspondent, Trent Murray in Tel Aviv. Hamas says its delegation is in Cairo for talks on a three-stage ceasefire plan proposed by Egypt. Well, let's talk to our correspondent there, Adel El-Marouki. Adel, what's the latest on this possible ceasefire plan?
Well, it comes as Egypt is trying to collect responses to its
ceasefire initiative that has been released almost a week ago. Egypt is proposing a number of ceasefires consecutive and extended, short periods to be extended, while also Cairo is proposing during that time several deals of exchanging of hostages should be in place. This, Cairo hopes, would build trust between the two sides, hopefully to pave roads for longer talks and complete cessation of hostilities in the Gaza enclave. It comes also as the Hamas leader, before the delegation arrived here to Cairo, announced that they will agree to no terms from the Egyptian proposal unless there is guarantees for an end to this war on Gaza. It also comes as a mounting pressure in Israel on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, specifically for releasing the hostages in Gaza. And therefore, it seems that there is a series of negotiations that Cairo, along with its regional partners, have been leading. Just 2 days ago, the King of Jordan, King Abdullah, was here to follow up on these details. And on Thursday night, the Egyptian government's State Information Service said that it has not yet received any feedback from all involved parties about its initiative. Cairo basically wants, after having these series of ceasefires in place, to have talks between Palestinian factions to establish a technocrat government led by civilians to manage the enclave and the aid flow into it, and also manage general elections, hopefully to create a national unity government through which it can represent the entire Palestinian factions, in which Hamas and 4 other factions believe is also a positive way out, signaling that they will be part of that cabinet as well, and that all scenarios about having a future of Gaza without them, previously announced by Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of Hamas, are delusional plans.
Adel, thank you very much. Our correspondent Adel El-Marouki in Cairo. Well, let's go to Gaza now and talk to our correspondent there, Noor Harazin. So, Noor, the UN saying an estimated 150,000 Palestinians being forced to flee. What's the latest where you are?
Well, yes, big numbers of people are still evacuating their homes, especially after the recent evacuation orders from the Israeli side. Over the past 2 days, the Israeli drones thrown some leaflets on the Al-Bureij refugee camp in Middle Gaza and also on the Al-Nusayrat refugee camp in Middle Gaza, asking Palestinians to evacuate to either Deir al-Balah or Rafah in southern Gaza. However, Rafah, yes, it is a big city here in southern Gaza, but it is all about refugee camps and deserts. So people are going there, they're setting up their tents in desert. There is nothing there, there is zero infrastructure, no electricity, no running water, even there is no phone network, no internet. And already there is thousands, hundreds of thousands of Palestinian families that seek shelter there in the past weeks. And now even more people are evacuating to Rafah, which is already overloaded and crowded with people. So yes, the situation is catastrophic. Actually, now we have people staying inside their homes, even though there were evacuation warnings, because they have no place to go. Also talking about the latest Israeli attacks, and one of the Israeli strikes, the Israeli warplanes targeted the Az-Zuhur neighborhood, which is located in southern Rafah, and this neighborhood is filled with displaced people and their tents. A number of people were killed and injured. At the same time, the Israeli warplanes continue heavily striking several areas in Gaza, in northern Gaza, in southern Gaza, and in Middle Gaza. According to the Palestinian Health Ministry, 187 people were killed in Gaza over the past 24 hours.
So you mentioned, Noor, that there are lots of displaced Palestinians heading to Rafah, already an overwhelmed area. How is that area coping with this influx of people?
Well, people are not coping. People are actually struggling. They're struggling very much. There is people starving. According to the Palestinian Health Ministry here in Gaza, a number of children actually died because of hunger and because of the diseases that are spreading now inside the UN schools, shelters, and also inside the hospitals. The hospitals are now in Gaza are in such an unhealthy environment. The hospitals have become like a refugee camp for thousands of Palestinian families. At the same time, they're trying to cope with the big number of people injured, with the big number of patients. So yes, it is a catastrophic situation in the hospitals that are still operating in southern Gaza. It is a catastrophic situation inside the UN schools, and also it is a struggle for those who are staying now in an open-air camps like in Khan Yunis and Rafah. As I mentioned before, there is zero infrastructure there, and Palestinians are now taking the very hard decision of staying in their homes, being under the Israeli very heavy shelling and being under the Israeli air raids, rather than actually moving to these camps because of the because of the catastrophic situation there.
Noor, thank you very much. Our correspondent Noor Harazin in Gaza. Donald Trump has been blocked from the presidential ballot in a second US state. Maine's top election official disqualified the former president over his role in the January 2021 assault on the US Capitol. Trump's lawyers say they'll challenge the decision. Our correspondent Adiz Tianshan reports.
Following a decision by the top election official in the state of Maine, that's the Secretary of State, Shanna Bellows, who examined a case brought up by a group of citizens who challenged Trump's eligibility in the upcoming primary elections in March. Now, in her decision, she essentially ruled that Trump should be disqualified for inciting an insurrection on January 6, 2021. As you will remember, the Capitol Hill riots. Based on that incident, Trump has now become ineligible, according to the state Secretary of State. Now, earlier, in a statement she issued, she said that she did not reach this conclusion lightly, but she went on to say that she's mindful that no Secretary of State has ever deprived a presidential candidate of ballot access based on Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. But she also said that she is, however, also mindful that no presidential candidate has ever before engaged in insurrection. In other words, she's essentially basing her decision on a constitutional provision that prevents insurrectionists from holding office. Now, that's obviously a term that's been very much debated. It's very unclear by certain states, making a decision as to what is defined as insurrectionist has become a legal issue in certain states. But Trump's campaign has vowed to essentially appeal the decision. In another statement from one of Trump's campaign spokespeople, Stephen Chung, we heard him call this move essentially a partisan election interference efforts. And he went on to call this a hostile assault on American democracy. And he even went on as far as to call the state Secretary of State in Maine a virulent leftist. So this is definitely a very big political debate here. And we understand that Trump's team will now have 5 days to appeal this at the state's Supreme Court.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. A partial green light to join Europe's free travel zone. But some countries still have concerns about Romania and Bulgaria.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen, so it's a necessity.
Well, China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us. And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliet Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more...
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us, excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why? This is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Welcome back. A reminder of our headlines. Tens of thousands of Palestinians forced to flee central Gaza as Israeli forces advance. The United Nations says 85% of the enclave's population is now displaced. And Maine becomes the second US state to block Donald Trump from running for president there over claims of insurrection. Russia has attacked cities across Ukraine, killing at least 18 people in one of its biggest coordinated assaults since the conflict began. Ukraine's military says multiple locations, including Kyiv, Lviv, Odessa and Kharkiv, were hit simultaneously by drones and missiles. Ukraine's President Zelensky said the country's air defense systems shot down many of them. It came after the United States approved its latest package of military aid to Ukraine. Well, let's talk now to Sean Bell, who's a British retired Air Vice Marshal and military analyst. Good to see you, Sean. Welcome back to the programme. So where does this wave of attacks sit in the context of this war? How bad is it?
Well, first of all, it's the biggest attack that's happened since the war begun. I mean, President Zelensky announced that 122 missiles were launched from Russia in a sort of simultaneous attack. If you look at the record books, back in November last year was the biggest to date, was 96. So going over 100 in one sustained attack. And this was a mix of the sort of Shahed 136 drones, the sort of slow speed, 100-mile-an-hour drones that are relatively simple to shoot down, all the way up through ballistic missiles, up to the hypersonic missiles. And although, as you said, Ukraine is getting better at shooting these things out of the sky, inevitably the wreckage still falls down and the explosives often still detonate. They just don't hit their intended target. And although, as you said, the casualty rates keep climbing, as I understand it, the latest figures are now 22 people killed, 86 injured. But if you look at some of the wreckage and the carnage that's been wreaked, there are antenatal hospitals, there's schools, there are residential areas. I suspect those figures will rise in the coming hours.
So why has it happened now? Is it in response to anything in particular?
Well, inevitably, I think as a military analyst, I'm always looking at the why question. Now, ultimately, Putin and his military experts will be only people who know why. But one thing to be sure is they've been short. Russia's been very short of cruise missiles and missiles in general. So it does raise the question of why they've suddenly launched such a surge. Three main reasons jump to mind. About a year ago, Russia was targeting Ukraine's energy infrastructure, bluntly, just to make life as miserable as possible for the Ukrainian people. It didn't work last year. Not quite sure why it's going to work this year. Second reason is Russian retribution. Russia lost another one of its landing ships, the Russian Navy ships, and that now means that Ukraine has destroyed 20% of Russia's Black Sea fleet, and that's a Ukraine that doesn't actually have a credible navy at the moment. The third reason, though, from a military perspective, these waves of attacks are normally associated with some big ground offensive. Now, neither side is really ready for another ground offensive. Ukraine's has stalled, but Russia throughout this summer has kept its focus on the Donbass region. We heard on Christmas Day that they'd actually seized Marinka, which is just in the south, and it looks likely that despite the winter fighting, despite the massive casualties, Russia is still focused on that as a priority of President Putin's special military operation. So it could be actually part of that continued attack.
And you talked about those massive casualties. Recent US intelligence suggesting Russian losses so far are more than 300,000 troops. You mentioned some of those Navy ships being destroyed. With all that in mind, can Russia carry on this conflict at this level?
The short answer is yes. Russia is a major superpower. It has access to hundreds of thousands, millions of people if it wants to throw more people at the fight. What's been interesting from a media perspective, we tend to focus on the ships being destroyed, Ukrainian attacks on Crimean ports or Russian oil infrastructure. But the harsh reality is the metric of success, the only one that really counts in this conflict, is territory regained. And over this last year, Ukraine, despite having a massive support from the West, has really not translated that onto gains on the ground. And Russia has managed to withstand that onslaught. You have to look at it sort of grand strategically, that Ukraine is a relative David to Russia's Goliath, and unless Ukraine manages to retain the support of the West, which obviously is stalling a bit at the moment, it will be very vulnerable if the war continues.
So can it, do you think, keep that international support going? Ukraine, of course, has suffered losses too on the battlefield. Is there still international backing for Kyiv?
I think that from a moral perspective, of course there is. You won't see any of the international leaders doing anything other than providing fulsome support. But I think it's worth looking back. At the start of this conflict, the West was very concerned that Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine actually might be the start of a much bigger grand plan. And of course, Europe's seen 2 world wars emanate from a similar sort of starting point. And that's why they got involved. Ukraine's not a member of NATO, but the West provided a lot of military support. If you wind the clock forward now almost 2 years since the start of the conflict, Russia has been badly decimated by the Ukraine war. It's lost over 2,000 battle tanks. It no longer poses that same threat to Europe as it once did. And therefore, inevitably, because Ukraine is not a member of NATO, can the West continue to support Ukraine to the same level as it did last year? The answer is it will struggle to do so, given conflicting domestic priorities. So the pressure is building on President Zelensky. And of course, the distraction of the Israel conflict hasn't helped him either.
Sean, great to talk to you. Thank you very much for joining us today. That's Sean Bell, the military analyst. From March, Romania and Bulgaria will become partial members of Europe's Schengen zone, which allows free movement across international borders. Both countries joined the European Union in 2007, but until now they've been among a handful of EU nations to remain outside the zone. The Schengen area comprises 27 European countries that have abolished border controls. More than 400 million people can travel between Schengen countries without being stopped or asked to show a passport, while cargo can also be moved without checks. 23 Schengen countries are in the EU and 4 are not: Iceland, Liechtenstein, Norway and Switzerland. Austria had objected to Romania and Bulgaria joining because of concerns about illegal migration. But now a deal has been struck on partial membership, allowing borderless travel via air and sea from March next year. Further negotiations will follow on land borders. Romania and Bulgaria had been trying to join the Schengen area for more than a decade. Our correspondent Alyosha Milenkovic reports.
This part of Bucharest's airport departure terminal was built 11 years ago in preparation for Romania's entering the Schengen zone. It has stood empty since 2012, but Romania's long campaign to join has had some success. Airport passengers to Schengen countries will no longer require passport checks from March of next year. But being kept outside the zone for so long has reeled authorities.
Romania, from the economic point of view, is losing 2 billion euros every year due to the fact that we are not members of the Schengen agreement.
Some estimates put that figure as high as $11 billion due to lost trade, taxes and waiting times at the border crossings. After years of campaigning, Austria, the strongest opponent of Romania's joining, proposed a gradual and conditional entry, allowing flights and maritime border crossings without checks. Austria's main criticism of Romania is that it's not doing enough to fight illegal migration, an issue authorities say they are trying to tackle.
In the first 11 months, 436 migrants were discovered while attempting to cross the border illegally on foot. And over 6,400 were discovered in various means of transportation.
Close to the Nadlac border crossing with Hungary, we joined Denisa and Marius, two Romanian border police officers in their patrol as they search for illegal migrants. Their SUV navigated over the Nadlac's muddy back roads, but sometimes they had to continue on foot despite adverse weather conditions. They hope their efforts will help Romania eventually become a full member of the exclusive Schengen club.
As long as Romania is kept out of the Schengen zone, the situation at the borders will be unchanged. People will wait, sometimes for hours, just to cross from one EU country to another. Aljosha Milenkovic, CGTN, Nadlac border crossing.
Britain has condemned what it calls Venezuela's unjustified actions in sending thousands of troops to carry out military exercises near the border with Guyana. President Nicolas Maduro said it was in response to what he described as UK provocation after Britain sent a warship to the area. Tensions have risen sharply since huge oil reserves were discovered in waters off Guyana's Essequibo region, which Venezuela claims as its own territory. Dong Jun has been appointed China's new defense minister. He previously served as commander of the People's Liberation Army Navy. It comes as the 7th session of the Standing Committee of the 14th National People's Congress finished in Beijing. Government officials in the Democratic Republic of Congo have rejected calls from the opposition for an election rerun. It comes after police forcibly broke up a banned protest march in Kinshasa over how the poll was conducted. Provisional results show that President Tshisekedi was well ahead of his rivals. But the opposition says that voting was marred by widespread irregularities and by fraud, which has been denied by the Electoral Commission. The United States military has carried out the latest launch of its secretive robot space plane using a SpaceX Falcon Heavy rocket for the first time. The X-37B will deploy payloads and conduct experiments, but little else is known about the mission. It's 7th since 2010. It comes 2 weeks after China launched a reusable test spacecraft to carry out science experiments in space. Our headlines again. Tens of thousands of Palestinians forced to flee central Gaza as Israeli forces advance. The United Nations says 85% of the enclave's population is now displaced. Russia launches a huge coordinated air assault on cities across Ukraine, killing 18 people and destroying infrastructure. It came after the United States approved its latest package of military aid to Ukraine. And Maine becomes the second US state to block Donald Trump from running for president there, with claims of insurrection. Trump's lawyers say they'll challenge the decision. And that is The World Today. Thanks for watching. There's more news on CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app, or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone. We're back with more news at the top of the hour. Coming up next, it's World Insight. For now, from all of the team in London, it's goodbye. News.